Be me, Joey. Just a regular guy working in what you'd call the tech sector. My job isn't glamorous. I'm basically a code janitor, a QA analyst. I find the bugs the real geniuses create, document them, and send them back. It pays the bills. The office was, for the longest time, just a place. Not good, not bad. A perfectly neutral zone of corporate beige. We had our ecosystem. The engineers, the IT guys, we were the foundation. We kept the lights on, made sure the servers didn't catch fire, and built the product that everyone else sold. Most of us were guys. Not by design, it's just how it shook out. We were quiet, kept to ourselves, and focused on the work. The undisputed king of our little kingdom was Henry. Henry was the lead engineer. He wasn't a manager in the traditional sense. He didn't have the title or the desire for it. He was more like a tribal elder. He'd been with the company since the beginning. He probably wrote the first lines of code for our main product on a computer that now belongs in a museum. He was a man of very few words. You could go a whole week without hearing him speak more than 20 words in total. But when he did speak, you listened, because it meant either something was very wrong or he had just solved a problem no one else could. I remember one time, a few years back, our entire client database got corrupted. Total meltdown, panic everywhere. The C-suite was running around like their hair was on fire. People were talking about bankruptcy. Henry just walked into the server room with a cup of coffee, closed the door, and came out 3 hours later. He sent a single email to the entire company. It's fixed. That was it. No explanation, no grandstanding. The guy was a legend. He was the load-bearing pillar of the entire company. On the other side of the office, you had the sales and marketing departments. This was where the noise came from. Loud phone calls, celebratory gongs, endless meetings about synergy and branding. Mostly women over there. Again, just how it was. They were good at their jobs. They sold the thing we built. The head of marketing was a woman named Laura. Laura was sharp, no nonsense, data-driven, and ruthlessly efficient. She didn't care about office politics. She cared about metrics, conversion rates, and hitting her quarterly targets. She and Henry had a weirdly functional relationship. She'd march over to his desk, ask for some impossible data set or a new tracking feature, and he'd just nod slowly. A day later, an email would land in her inbox with exactly what she needed. No small talk, no fuss, just results. The two departments were like oil and water, but we didn't mix enough to cause any real problems. We did our job, they did theirs. The system worked. It was a stable, predictable, and boringly effective machine. Then came Paula. She was hired as the new head of HR sometime last spring. From day one, it was clear she wasn't like the old HR lady, who mostly just handled payroll and reminded us to do our compliance training. Paola was different. She had a mission. Her introductory email was a masterpiece of corporate jargon. It was full of phrases like intersectional frameworks, deconstructing workplace hierarchies, and fostering psychological safety. Most of us just rolled our eyes and sent it to the trash folder. It was just another HR drone trying to justify her salary. But the emails kept coming. Memos about unconscious bias, mandatory workshops on allyship. Posters started appearing in the break room with diagrams explaining privilege. It was all just background noise. Annoying, but easy to ignore. We had actual work to do. Her first real move was to install a feedback box where people could anonymously report microaggressions. Within a week, one of the best IT guys got a formal warning because he'd referred to a group of female colleagues as "you guys." That was the first red flag, the first sign that this wasn't just corporate fluff. Paula started holding these listening sessions. She'd try to get the engineers to talk about their feelings about the workplace culture. Picture a room full of guys who communicate primarily through code comments and bug reports, being asked to share their emotional truth. It was excruciating. just dead silence and the sound of someone's phone buzzing. She interpreted our silence not as a lack of interest, but as evidence of a problem. She saw our quiet focus as toxic masculinity and a refusal to be vulnerable. We weren't being vulnerable. We were being busy. We were trying to hit deadlines, but she had her narrative, and she was sticking to it. Then came the email that changed everything. An all-hands meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Mandatory attendance. The whole company packed into the main conference room. Paola stood at the front, beaming, next to a PowerPoint presentation with the company logo and a lot of pastel colors. She started her speech with the usual platitudes, praising our commitment to progress, our journey toward a more equitable future. Then she clicked to the next slide. In huge letters, it read, "The Male Silence Day Initiative." A confused murmur went through the room. She held up her hands for silence, a triumphant smile on her face. She explained that for one full day, all male employees would be required to remain silent. They were not to speak in meetings, not to talk at their desks, not to engage in any verbal communication whatsoever. The stated purpose, she said, was to amplify the voices of our female colleagues and to create a space where women can lead without being interrupted or spoken over. She said it was an exercise for men to learn the value of listening. My jaw was on the floor. I looked around the room. The guys in the engineering department all had the same look on their faces, a mixture of disbelief and quiet contempt. Some of the women from marketing and sales were nodding along. A few of them even started clapping. They saw it as some kind of bold, progressive statement. Laura, the marketing head, just looked confused. I could see the gears turning in her head. She wasn't thinking about social justice. She was thinking about her project timelines. She was doing the math on what a day of no communication with the engineering team would cost her. But the most important reaction was Henry's. I made sure to look at him. He was sitting in his usual spot in the back row. He had no expression on his face. None. Just a blank, calm stare directed at Paola. He didn't look angry. He didn't look surprised. He just looked empty. He watched her finish her speech. Then his eyes flicked down to the laptop on his knees, and he started typing. He had already moved on. He had processed the information and was now calculating the response. The meeting ended. Paola told us the first Male Silence Day would be the very next day, Friday. She said participation was not optional and that HR would be monitoring compliance. The men filed out of the room in total silence. There was no big meeting in the men's bathroom, no secret emails, no angry huddle in the parking lot. None of that was necessary. An hour later, a single message appeared in the engineering team's group chat. It was from Henry. It said, "Team, please be reminded of the new HR policy going into effect tomorrow. I expect everyone to be in full compliance." That was it. That was the signal. The message was perfectly professional. It could be shown to anyone from HR without raising suspicion. But we all understood the real meaning. We weren't just going to be silent. We were going to be maliciously compliant. We were going to follow the new rule so precisely and so completely that it would break the very system it was meant to improve. Across the office, I saw it. A quiet nod between two IT guys, a shared glance between a programmer and a database admin. A silent pact was formed. Not a word was spoken, but the decision was unanimous. The next morning, the office was a different place. It was quiet, eerily quiet. The usual morning buzz was gone, the low hum of conversations, the chatter from the coffee machine, all of it was replaced by a dead, heavy silence. At first, the women seemed to enjoy it. They were louder than usual, filling the vacuum we had left. Their conversations and laughter echoed in the cavernous room. Paola was walking around the office like a proud general surveying her victory. She had a clipboard and was literally making notes, a smug grin plastered on her face. She thought she had won. She thought she was changing the world. The first crack appeared around 10 a.m. Laura from marketing needed access to the latest customer analytics from the main server to prepare for a big meeting. Normally, she'd just walk over to Henry's desk. She did just that. I watched the whole thing from my cubicle. She walked up to his desk and started talking, explaining what she needed. Henry stopped typing. He looked up at her, gave her a small, polite smile, and then slowly raised his hand and pointed. He was pointing to one of the posters Paola had put up everywhere, the one with the big, bold letters, "A Day to Listen, Male Silence Day." Laura stared at the poster, then back at Henry. Her expression shifted from confusion to frustration. She tried again, speaking slower this time, as if he didn't understand. Henry just smiled again, a patient, placid smile, and gestured back toward the poster. He wasn't being rude, he was just complying. She finally huffed in annoyance and stormed off. She went to another senior engineer, a guy named Mike. Mike gave her the exact same routine. A polite smile, a point to the poster. Laura was starting to realize the box she was in. She had a deadline, and the men who held the keys to her data were following the new rules to the letter. Throughout the day, little fires started breaking out all over the office. A saleswoman couldn't generate a quote because the pricing tool, which an engineer had built, was throwing an error. She asked for help and was met with a silent, apologetic shrug. The main office printer jammed. The IT guy came over, opened it up, saw a complex paper jam, and then communicated the problem through an elaborate series of hand gestures, like a game of charades. He couldn't ask anyone if they had tried to fix it themselves, so he had to assume the worst. It took him 45 minutes to fix what was normally a 5-minute job. Every interaction was the same. Men would respond to emails, but only with the bare minimum of information. A request for a file would be met with an email containing only the attachment. No, "Here you go," or "Let me know if you need anything else." Just the file. It was a masterclass in passive resistance. We were doing our jobs, but without the vital lubricant of casual, quick communication. The office, which was once a functioning machine, was now grinding to a halt. By the end of the day, the mood had shifted. The initial glee from the women had evaporated, replaced by a tense, simmering frustration. Paola still seemed oblivious. She sent out a company-wide email congratulating everyone on a successful and insightful first Male Silence Day. She praised the men for their thoughtful participation. She had no idea what was really happening. We all went home for the weekend. On Monday morning, we came back to the office. And the silence continued. This is when the panic started to set in. The women had assumed, like Paula, that this was a one-day gimmick, a silly corporate exercise that would be over and done with. But we weren't talking. Not on Monday. Not on Tuesday. The silent compliance was no longer a one-day event. It was the new status quo. Laura tried to corner Henry by the elevators. I saw her talking at him, her voice low and urgent. He just stood there, listening patiently, hands in his pockets. When she finished, he just nodded as if to say, "I have heard you," and then got on the elevator. Projects were now officially stalling. A major software update that was supposed to be deployed over the weekend had been delayed because the final verbal sign-offs and coordination couldn't happen. The marketing team was completely crippled. They relied on a constant back and forth with the engineers to test new campaign ideas, pull data, and fix bugs on the website. Now their every request had to be submitted as a formal ticket through the system. A question that would have taken a 30-second conversation now took a day of back-and-forth emails. The women started trying to solve the technical problems themselves. It was a disaster. I watched one of the junior marketers try to update a section of the company website. She managed to delete the entire careers page and didn't even realize it for 3 hours. Another one tried to run a script to pull some sales data and ended up overloading a server, slowing down the entire network for half the company. They were competent at their own jobs, but they were completely out of their depth with the technical infrastructure that they had always taken for granted. Laura went to see Paula. Her office had glass walls, so we could see the whole confrontation. Laura was visibly angry. She was waving her hands, pointing out at the main office floor. She was clearly explaining that work had ground to a halt. Paola's response was to put a calming hand on her arm. She was smiling, shaking her head, as if Laura was just being hysterical. Paola's theory, as we later found out, was that this was just a form of protest, a fragile male ego tantrum. She was convinced that if she held the line, we would eventually break and come crawling back, begging to be allowed to speak again. She couldn't have been more wrong. We weren't protesting. We weren't having a tantrum. We were complying. We were showing them exactly what the world they asked for looked like. A world without our input. A world without our expertise. A world without our voices. And that world was falling apart. The first week ended in a state of controlled chaos. Deadlines were being missed left and right. The hum of productivity had been replaced by the tense silence of a library during a bomb scare. We, the men, just kept working. Heads down, focused, silent. We were completing our individual tasks, writing code, fixing bugs, managing servers. But the connective tissue of the company, the quick questions, the collaborative problem-solving, the casual, hey, can you look at this for a sec, was gone. And without it, the company was bleeding out. The second week began, and the silence was now a heavy, oppressive blanket over the entire office. It was no longer a novelty. It was the new, dysfunctional reality. The war of attrition had begun. And Paula, in her infinite wisdom, had just decided to double down. The second week started not with a bang, but with a memo. It came from Paula, of course, sent to the entire company. The subject was Reflections and Moving Forward. In it, she addressed the unforeseen challenges of the Male Silence Day initiative, but she didn't apologize. She didn't admit she'd made a mistake. Instead, she reframed our silence. She wrote that some men were engaging in what she called protest silence, a form of weaponized non-communication stemming from masculine fragility. She announced that she would be holding a women-only town hall meeting to discuss female leadership strategies in the face of institutional resistance. She was doubling down. She genuinely believed we were the problem, not her policy. She thought she could win a war of attrition. She had no idea that we weren't fighting. We were just letting her creation run its natural course. The women's town hall happened that afternoon. We could see them all gathered in the big glass-walled conference room. From what I heard later, it was not the unified rah-rah session Paula had envisioned. She tried to give a motivational speech about empowerment and breaking barriers. But Laura immediately cut her off. She stood up with a spreadsheet printed out and started listing, one by one, all the projects that were currently stalled, all the deadlines missed, all the revenue at risk. She wasn't talking about feelings. She was talking about numbers, cold, hard, and undeniable. Other women started to chime in, not with support for Paula, but with their own frustrations. The sales team was furious about the broken quoting tool. The product managers were panicking about the delayed software release. The meeting devolved into an argument. Paola's attempt to build a sisterhood of solidarity had turned into a mutiny. Meanwhile, on our side of the office, something else was happening. A new kind of camaraderie was forming. We started eating lunch together, the whole engineering and IT department. We'd all go to the cafeteria, get our food, and sit at one long table, and we wouldn't say a word, just eat in comfortable silence. It was strange, but it was powerful. It was a visible sign of our unity. We didn't need to talk. We were all on the same page. Little acts of silent support started happening. I saw a junior programmer struggling with a piece of code. He was staring at his screen, completely stuck. Henry, who was walking by, noticed. He didn't say a word. He just pulled up a chair, sat next to the kid, and started pointing at the screen. He pointed at a line of code. The kid would look at it, nod. Henry would point to another. In 5 minutes of silent pointing and nodding, the problem was solved. Henry patted the kid on the shoulder and walked away. We were becoming more efficient in our own strange, silent way, but our efficiency was now completely disconnected from the rest of the company. We were an island. By the middle of the second week, the first email from upper management arrived. It was from the VP of Operations. He wanted to know why the software update was over a week late. Laura had to respond. She had to explain that there were communication bottlenecks with the engineering team. She was trying to be diplomatic, but the truth was leaking out. The cracks were no longer just on the surface. They were now reaching the foundations. Paola, however, was still living in her own reality. She started organizing more workshops, this time for women only. Coding for beginners. Understanding server infrastructure. She thought she could just teach the women to do our jobs. She seemed to believe that decades of specialized knowledge and experience could be replaced by a 2-hour PowerPoint presentation. The attempts were laughable. I saw a group of saleswomen trying to figure out our server rack, holding a printout of a server room for dummies article. They looked like tourists with a map in a foreign country. The atmosphere in the office was now toxic, but in a completely new way. The frustration from the women was palpable. They started snapping at each other. The blame game was in full swing. The men just kept our heads down. We were immune to it. We were in our own silent world. I once made eye contact with Laura from across the room. She looked exhausted, defeated, and for the first time, she looked at me with something that wasn't frustration. It was a look of desperate appeal. I just gave her a small, helpless shrug. My hands were tied by her own side's rules. Then came the big one, the event that would bring the whole house of cards down. The company had been trying to land a massive client for almost a year, a huge name in the financial industry. This wasn't just another sale. This was a company maker, a deal that would secure our budget for the next 5 years. We were in the final stages. The last step was a technical deep dive call with the client's engineering team. They needed to be sure our platform was secure, stable, and scalable enough for their needs. This was Henry's domain. He was the only one who could answer their questions with the depth and confidence required. The meeting was set for a Wednesday morning, week 3 of the silence. An email went out scheduling the call. The required attendees included the CEO, the CTO, Laura, Paola, Henry, and his 3 most senior engineers. This was going to be interesting. The morning of the call, the tension in the office was so thick you could taste it. At 10 a.m., we all filed into the main boardroom, the big one, reserved for the most important meetings. The CEO was there, looking grim. Laura looked like she hadn't slept in days. Paola was there too, looking uncharacteristically nervous. I think even she was starting to realize that this was a situation her HR playbook had not prepared her for. And then there was Henry and his team. They walked in, sat down, opened their laptops, and waited. Silent, professional. The video call started. On the giant screen, we saw a panel of serious-looking people, the client's tech team. The initial introductions were handled by our CEO. He was trying to sound upbeat, but his voice was strained. Then, the client's lead engineer, a man with a stern face and no time for nonsense, got straight to the point. He started asking questions, deep technical questions, about our data encryption protocols in transit and at rest, about our API's rate limiting and failover mechanisms, about our disaster recovery plan and the latency of our database replication. These weren't softball questions. This was a technical interrogation. After the first question, our CEO turned to Henry. "Henry, could you speak to that?" Henry looked at the CEO. He then turned his head and looked at the client on the screen. He gave them a polite, professional nod. And then he did nothing. He just sat there, in silence. The CEO's face started to turn red. "Henry, I need you to answer the question." Henry didn't even flinch. He slowly, deliberately turned his head to the side and looked directly at Paola. It was the most devastatingly powerful move he could have made. He didn't say a word, but his message was crystal clear. You made the rules. You are in charge of communication. This is your show. All eyes in the room swiveled to Paola. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a freight train. She started to stammer. She tried to answer the question about data encryption by talking about synergizing our security paradigms and leveraging best practice frameworks. It was complete, undiluted gibberish, a word salad of corporate buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. The client's lead engineer on the screen just stared at her, his expression turning from serious to incredulous. He cut her off mid-sentence. "Ma'am, that was not an answer. That wasn't even a sentence. Can someone who actually knows what they're talking about please respond?" The CEO was practically vibrating with rage. He hissed at Henry. "Answer him, now! That's an order." Henry remained perfectly still. He was a statue. He was complying with HR policy. An order from the CEO did not supersede a mandatory company-wide initiative implemented by HR. In the corporate world, HR rules are ironclad. The client's team started talking amongst themselves, their microphones muted. We could just see them shaking their heads. Then, their lead engineer unmuted himself. "You know what?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "We're done here. We cannot and will not partner with a company that is this fundamentally broken. Thank you for your time." And the screen went blank. They had hung up. The deal was dead. For about 10 seconds, there was a profound, absolute silence in the boardroom. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Then the CEO exploded. I had never seen anything like it. He slammed his fist on the table so hard that the water pitchers jumped. He turned to Paola, his face a mask of pure fury. He didn't yell. He spoke in a low, shaking voice that was far more terrifying than any shout. He told her to get out. She just stared at him, speechless. He pointed at the door. "Get out of my boardroom, now." She scrambled out of her chair and practically ran from the room. The CEO then looked at Henry. His anger was still there, but it was now mixed with a look of dawning, horrified understanding. He looked at Henry, then at the empty chairs of his silent team, and then around at the wreckage of the call. He just shook his head, looking utterly defeated. He turned to the rest of us. "Meeting's over," he mumbled, and walked out of the room. An hour later, the email landed in everyone's inbox. It was from the CEO himself. Subject: an important update on workplace communication policies. The email was short and to the point. It stated that a recent HR initiative has been immediately and permanently suspended. It went on to say that effective immediately, all employees are expected to resume normal, collaborative, and verbal communication as required to perform their duties. It ended with an apology for any disruption this may have caused to our productivity and our business. It was a total, unconditional surrender. The next morning, Paola called an all-hands meeting, the one where she had to formally announce her defeat. She stood at the front of the room, looking pale and diminished. She read from a script, her voice flat and robotic. She announced that the Male Silence Day initiative was officially over. She didn't apologize. She just said that the learning outcomes of the experiment would be integrated into future HR strategies. When she finished, there was no applause, no reaction at all, just dead silence. Then something amazing happened. Henry, from the back of the room, cleared his throat. It was the first sound any of us had heard him make in 3 weeks. The entire room turned to look at him. He simply asked, "Are we done here? We have a software update to deploy." Paula just nodded, unable to speak. And with that, all the men in the room just stood up in unison and walked out, leaving her alone at the podium. We went back to our desks, and we started talking. But it wasn't the same. It would never be the same. The silence was broken, but the office culture was shattered. The communication was back, but it was different. It was strictly professional, transactional. The small talk was gone. The casual favors were gone. The friendly banter was gone. We did our jobs. We answered questions when asked. We collaborated when required. But the well of goodwill had run dry. We were no longer a team. We were just co-workers. The office became a much quieter, colder, but strangely more efficient place. There were no more distractions, no more pointless meetings, just work. Paula lasted another month. She was a ghost in the office. No one spoke to her unless they absolutely had to. Her authority was gone. One day, she was just gone. Her desk was cleared out overnight. An email from the CEO announced she had decided to pursue other opportunities. No one asked where she went. No one cared. We proved our value, not by shouting about it, but by quietly removing it from the equation. They wanted to know what the office would be like without men's voices. Now they know. It's silent. It's broken. And it's a mess of their own making. As for us, we just work. And we are finally left in peace.